outrage among European Union leaders as the news Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny had died on Friday while imprisoned in a Russian prison colony.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky prepares for his visit to France and Germany, while Washington warns Moscow troops are making headway in Avdiivka. Thousands of Italian farmers rally in the streets of Rome to protest against EU rules regarding the agricultural industry.
The death of Alexei Navalny sparked outrage and indignation in the European Union, and everyone blames the same person, Vladimir Putin. The president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, says the Russian president fears nothing more than dissent from his own people. Roberta Metsola, president of the European Parliament, calls him a fighter whose courage will echo through generations, stating that Russia took his freedom and his life, but not his dignity. EU President Charles Michel holds the Russian regime solely responsible for the death of the Russian dissident who fought for the values of freedom and democracy. Members of the European Parliament are also on the same page.
With Navalny has died one of our last hopes, to have a relation between a democratic Russia and our Europe. And that's what we all wanted in the past. With him goes this opportunity, unfortunately. It's a very sad occasion, also for us Europeans.
Alexei Navalny was given the Sakharov Prize for Freedom of Thought, the highest honour from the European Parliament in 2021, whilst he was in prison. His daughter, Daria Navalnaya, accepted the prize on his behalf.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky announced on Thursday the creation of a, quote, new security architecture in his country. While it is unsure what that would entail, the declaration comes ahead of his visits to Germany and France on Friday. During his trip, the Ukrainian leader is expected to sign bilateral security agreements with Paris. Meanwhile, the White House warned that Moscow was beginning to overwhelm Ukrainian forces in Avdiivka.
I want to share a few words about the battlefield situation in Ukraine, where the fighting is incredibly intense in the east, particularly in a city called Avdiivka. It's a city that we've talked about several times before. Unfortunately, we're getting reports from the Ukrainians that the situation is critical, with the Russians continuing to press Ukrainian positions every single day. Avdiivka is at risk of falling into Russian control.
The Russian military has pressed attacks in several sectors in a bid to drain Kyiv's reserves and deplete its ammunitions. For months, the action has focused on Avdiivka. The city is seen as a gateway to the Russian-held regional capital of Donetsk.
NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg stated that NATO does not see any immediate threat of military attacks on a NATO member, but noted that there is a constant risk of hybrid attacks. The Institute for the Study of War has recently observed Kremlin actors, including Russian President Vladimir Putin, setting informational conditions to justify possible Russian hybrid attacks on Moldova, as well as the Baltic states, Denmark and Finland. In its latest assessment, the US-based think tank says the Kremlin is conducting information operations against Moldova very similar to those that the Kremlin used before its invasions of Ukraine in 2014 and 2022, likely to set conditions to justify possible future Russian escalation against Moldova. Although the timing of a possible Russian hybrid operation there is unclear, the Kremlin is setting informational conditions to make it possible soon. Earlier, the Estonian Foreign Intelligence Service stated that the Russian military's ongoing restructuring and expansion effort aims to intensify Russian military's posturing against Finland and the wider NATO alliance. The VLA reported that the Russian military is forming the Leningrad Military District and Moscow Military District in order to posture against Finland and NATO, while also attempting to, quote, partially strengthen its units in the Baltic region. The VLA's assessment is consistent with the Institute for the Study of War's assessment that Russia may be arranging military assets in a way to posture along the border with NATO members in the mid to long term. The Estonian Foreign Intelligence Service says the likelihood of a direct military attack against Estonia remains low this year, but the security situation in Europe and along Estonia's borders in the near future depends on whether Ukraine, with the support of its allies, can shatter Russia's aggression.
Patients in beds lined the corridors of the Nasser Medical Complex in Gaza on Thursday. It is the main hospital in the southern part of the Strip, stormed by IDF forces earlier in the day, killing at least 4 patients and wounding several others. The Israeli army said it was a limited operation seeking the remains of hostages taken by Hamas.
فوق وتحت الجيش وحاطين ضواء وكشافات ومرقوا 5 اللي بدهم اياه بياخذوه. طولنا من الساعة 3 للساعة 6 عبال لما رقت وانا واقف مش قادر اقف ولا امشي. واللي بدهم اياه بياخذوه اللي بدهم اياه بشلحوهم جوا وطبوا فيهم ضرب بعذبوهم.
The military has said it had credible intelligence that hostages were kept in the hospital and that their remains might still be inside.
If it weren't for Hamas starting this war, taking our hostages and hiding in the hospital, we wouldn't need to be in the hospital in the first place. Hamas started this war, Israel will end this war.
Satellite images show Egypt building a wall and leveling land near its border with the Gaza Strip, ahead of a planned Israeli offensive targeting the border town of Rafah.
The Greek parliament on Thursday approved the legislation of same-sex civil marriage. Polls show that the majority of Greeks were in favor of the bill drawn up by the center-right government and supported by 4 left-wing parties. The Greek Orthodox Church was against it.
Η σημερινή μέρα είναι μέρα χαράς, γιατί από αύριο ένας φραγμός ακόμα μεταξύ μας καταργείται για να γίνει γέφυρα συνύπαρξης σε μια ελεύθερη πολιτεία με ελεύθερους πολίτες.
The bill grants full parental rights on married same-sex partners with children. Yet it precludes gay couples from parenthood through surrogate mothers in Greece. The issue has divided Greeks. LGBTQI+ organizations have led the marches in support of the bill.
Not 1, but 3 rallies were staged by Italian farmers in Rome on Thursday. Over 1,000 of them flocked to the Italian capital from across the country. The crowd group was the main organizer of the protest. They don't identify with any unions and are against Brussels' rule. They traveled to the Italian capital to deliver their message to the European Commission.
Gli agricoltori in questo momento non decidono, non hanno potere contrattuale sui prezzi, non hanno potere contrattuali sulle scelte politiche che vengono calate dall'alto. Sulla lettera c'è una diffida proprio alla Commissione europea di entrare come entrano nelle istituzioni italiane.
Others instead decided to gather outside the mayor's office.
Questo è un movimento spontaneo. La gente che è scesa nelle strade non lo ha fatto perché qualcuno glielo ha chiesto o glielo ha ordinato, ma semplicemente perché è con le spalle al muro. Nelle strade in questi giorni, fra i trattori, c'è una generazione intera di nuovi agricoltori, allevatori, insieme a tanti altri, che rivendicano una cosa, il diritto al futuro. E non siamo da altre parti perché non ci convince l'idea, anzi non la condividiamo, l'idea che oggi bisogna chiedere le dimissioni del governo.
Later in the afternoon, hundreds of protesters and their trucks gathered in Rome's Circo Massimo for the day's final act.
Spero che si possa ottenere qualche cosa dal governo, qualche dialogo, diciamo, governo-agricoltori, altrimenti continueremo la protesta a oltranza.
Despite the government's concessions, farmers are still protesting, and that's because the movement is very much divided within itself among different fronts. While one side expresses satisfaction with the achievements so far, another side persists in making further demands. Giorgio Orlandi for Euronews in Rome.
France forward Kylian Mbappe has reportedly told Paris Saint-Germain he will leave the club at the end of the season. The terms of his departure are yet to be fully agreed. Mbappe's contract with PSG expires this summer, after which he will be a free agent. The 25-year-old has been widely linked with a move to Real Madrid. The club tried to poach him less than 2 years ago for €200 million, but the deal fell apart. Mbappe's arrival would give Madrid one of the top attacks in football.
A Russian citizen in Sweden is facing deportation back to Russia, where he will be forced to fight in the war against Ukraine. Sergei Podobny lives in the coastal northern city of Lulia with his wife Irina and his 14-year-old son Ivan. Sergei says his relatives in Russia have received his military conscription order. Yet the Swedish government is determining whether it is legitimate or not. As Ukrainian citizens, Sergei's wife and son are allowed to stay in Sweden.
It's a no-go for this wannabe Van Gogh. Last week, a mural was discovered by a family doing renovation works on their old house in Ghent. They thought the artwork could have been a genuine piece from the Dutch master, as the details were strikingly similar to his works. However, after careful analysis by experts from the University of Ghent, it was revealed that some of the pigments used were created after the artist had died, making it unlikely to be his work.